Welcome one and all to the Minish cast. This is episode 14 and I'm your host Petter, aka Pendio. In today's episode, we are talking about evolution of Zelda creatures. We'll get more into that, like what that involves later. And with me today, I have got AncientPoe.
Hello.
And I've got Spiritual Mask Salesman, also known as Charles.
Hey.
So, basically what the topic today is, we're gonna be talking about like theories and some things that might not necessarily be considered theories, but more like just an open discussion about how various creatures, enemies and races, and anything living really in Zelda, how they've evolved over the course of the timeline and all the games and whatnot. And we're talking evolution. We're not talking like I don't know what is there, like magical transformations,
right?
Or like we're not talking about that. We'll try to like focus more on Darwin,
right? Like
the things
like
that he talked about,
ecological pressures, behavioral modification, things like that, like organisms reacting to like influences in their environment. So I think for the purpose of this discussion, we're all aware it's a video game, but we're kind of trying to be like, let's suspend disbelief a little bit and just assume like these are real creatures existing in an ecosystem. They're not magically summoned, that they actually are what they are, and just kind of like, I guess we can sort of set that as part of a ground rule right now for anybody who's like, this is stupid, they're just magic. Like, we're just going to pretend they're not. Like, it's all a video game anyway, it's all made up anyway, but we're going to try to discuss, like, some actual, like, evolution theory, things like that, Darwinism, and, the evolution of behaviors, and things that you see that we've been able to observe in games, or maybe in, art, like official canonical art, that kind of give evidence to our points or what we might be trying to talk about.
Precisely. And I also, one thing I just want to say, like, before we really get into depth or on anything specific, I feel like the Pokemon franchise has given the people of today, or at least the youth of today, a false I don't know, like the wrong meaning of the word evolution, because what we're seeing in Pokemon, that's not evolution.
Right.
Like what they call evolution.
That's actually that's metamorphosis. That is the radical change of an organism from one form to a drastically altered form within the single timeline of a specific organism, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. That's metamorphosis. So, but in Pokemon, it doesn't sound. It sounds much cooler to go, oh, it's evolving, and not, oh, it's metamorphosing. Like, that's all right, 6-year-olds, take that one and run with it. But hey, you know what? When I was like in second grade, I learned the words simian and primate because of the TV show Mighty Max. So whatever. Well, no, actually, I learned it from Magic cards. Right? Yeah. Anyway, that's way off topic. Yada yada yada.
Right.
I know.
So I guess. Sorry.
Oh well. I was going to ask if you remember our pre-call last week. I had discussed something that was a topic both of you, or not topic, a subject you were both a little unfamiliar with, the concept of microevolution, macroevolution, and speciation. Do you think that's something we should go over real quick to kind of...
I think that's worth going a little bit, like, yeah.
Okay, because it kind of helps set some
Absolutely.
ground rules for what we're talking about, and it's something that, I learned it in high school, so I thought everybody did, but, I guess everybody doesn't always remember all that stuff.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Yeah, feel free to go over that for the viewers.
So, and because...
Oh, to be fair, high schools were crap here.
Hey, I live here too, I'm from the mitten, okay? So, anyway, but I'm going to try to kind of breeze through what we talked about real quick. There's differences. People have a bit of a misconception about what evolution is. So there's things like macroevolution, which is the change in species like over a long period of time, like how they change from one thing to another. There's microevolution, which is like small changes that while they might be noticeable, like you can maybe see them in the fossil record or see them from year to year if it's an extant species you are actively observing. And just in case you don't know, extant means something that exists on the Earth right now, as opposed to extinct being something that does not exist on Earth anymore. Like, for instance, the Darwin finches, the small changes in things like beak size that were observed from year to year as, a dry season or wet season happened. That's microevolution. And then speciation is when macroevolution occurs to a point that it creates a whole new species that is no longer capable of breeding either with other evolutionary offshoots or its ancestors. So if you have a population of, we'll say, squirrels, and an earthquake just bifurcates the land, put a big old canyon in between them, and the species are no longer the two portions of the same species are no longer interacting with each other, and they go that way for so long, and their environmental factors are different, and one evolves to become more arboreal, the other one evolves to become ground dwelling, and they go on for so long and they become two different species, and now those things can no longer produce viable offspring through mating. That's speciation. You've created a new species. So, are we good?
Yeah.
I think we are.
Okay, good.
Hopefully the listeners will
the ones that aren't
comprehend
asleep will be listening with rapt attention.
Yes. So now that we've got your attention, let's get into the first little subtopic. And because I think we've all three of us here today have been quite keen on discussing the different Blinn creatures in the Zelda games. So I figured we could start talking a little bit about those, being mini Blinns, bokoblins, moblins, big Blinns. There's big Blinns in Spirit Tracks, I think, and bulblins.
Yes. Which one?
Right. I think
Big
that's all
Blinn
of them.
was what, the one that jumps under the train car?
Yeah, that's all. That's the only time I can recall seeing them.
That might be a
Maybe
mutation.
in other places too.
I think some of these things might actually be mutations if they're something that exists. But we can get into that later.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, two ways we can move forward here. Obviously, if we go by the way the game's released, the monsters' designs were kind of different. But if you go timeline-wise, that's a whole different, thing,
Right.
Right.
And we could go both ways if you want.
Right.
I think so. So, taking a look at bokoblins, for example, Skyward Sword being the first game in the timeline, bokoblins have two horns. They have, and they stand quite upright and whatnot. Then looking at Breath of the Wild as a contrast, they have only one horn in this middle of the head, and they're much more hunched over. They've obviously changed.
And in Wind Waker, they changed as well. Because Wind Waker was their first canonical appearance, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Their first appearance.
Yeah, Bokoblin, the first. Yeah.
The first time they appeared in the game. Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, that the whole timeline thing.
Yeah.
Timelines. Anyway, so it's well, I mean, it kind of throws a wrench into what we're trying to talk about, because we're trying to talk about evolution over time, and it's kind of hard to talk about that when you have two separate ways of dividing the time that completely reorganizes everything and suddenly can't be taken in canonical order anymore. It's like trying to drop the Precambrian period right in the middle of the Triassic. It doesn't work. You can't just go in and edit history and just be like, oh, this happened this time now. And it does throw us off. So that's why we're trying to keep it a little bit more to things that are observable, I guess, about the organisms themselves. Right. So physical traits and things like that, and less about when they appear, just because the different...
Yeah, I mean, we can do that to a degree, but we can't focus too much on it.
Right. So, did you want to kick off with a specific starting point for this? For these?
I didn't have anything specific in mind other than, I guess, these Blinn creatures being something that we could kick off the discussion with.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say real quick, if we're going to go timeline-wise, obviously the first game is Skyward Sword. And, so, in Skyward Sword, Fi says something along the lines of, Demise was the source of all monsters.
Right.
Something like that.
Right.
Yeah, so all those monsters came from him.
Right. Well, I feel like it might be a little bit weird then, but I feel like if we want, we can say that the progenitor species would be bokoblins, because they appear in Skyward Sword, as do moblins. But if we're trying to go off of what will be the established timeline, taking Skyward Sword as the first event, technically the first part of the story is that little parchment scene in the beginning, where it's saying, there's this big war, and Hylia had like all her races, and Demise had all his monsters. And if you're looking at the races that are with Hylia in that sort of storybook kind of start thing, you can distinctly see there's a Goron, there's Hylians, there's the little robot guys. So you can make out like that species, this species, that species.
Yeah.
And then and I had checked this a long time ago for a totally different reason. When you see Demise, like all the figures that appear next to him are approximately identical. Like they're all like similar body proportions, similar shape, similar form. You don't see like that one's noticeable, that one's big and round. Like, so it's clear that for whatever reason, Bokoblins came first if you're looking at it through that sort of chronological lens. And that means that everything else must have come later, at least in the Blinn line, as we're talking about it.
Yeah, and I can also get behind that for the reason that the Bokoblins, like, out of all of those Blinn creatures, they seem mostly like, I guess, the center of them all. Like, they share some traits to all of them, and they're, like, medium-sized and stuff like that.
Right.
It makes sense that
they're like a hub species.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Because we had mini Blinns evolving potentially from that, being like much smaller, and then Moblins and big Blinns.
I definitely have my thoughts on mini Blinns.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess we had, and again, this was discussed before, but we had sort of like a variety of theories or approaches to how the different Blinns came about. And I guess I can bring up one of those ones, was that, and this was something I hadn't actually entertained for a while until about a year ago. I was having a conversation with a beekeeper, and he, it was very informative, because like he actually told me something that I at the time was not aware of, was that like when we think of bees, and we know there's like, there's drones and there's workers and these other things, we kind of think of them as their own separate things, like. And you see it in other species too, like ants and stuff. So like that movie Ants, like with a Z, had this popular, or had this idea of like the baby's born and it's like soldier, and then he gets shoved off to like the soldier side, and then the baby's like worker, and it's like shoved off to the worker side. It's like soldier, and so we were kind of thinking of it like that. But bees don't do that. What they do is they start usually at the lowest end. So that as an organism, they have a caste system, and they start their life as workers. And then as they grow, they actually take on new traits, and they sort of transform a little bit into field bees. So like they start off as doing like hive things, and then they go out, they grow and they change, they go out into the field, they gather pollen, and then they come back, and then after a while of that they become drones. So they actually, through their lives, they become different things. It's not like they're born one thing and then they die that same thing. And so from that possibility, like we could have maybe they start off as something like Bokoblins, and maybe if they like live long enough or something, they change into a Moblin, or they change into this thing or that thing. Or it's possible that they don't. Like they could be something else where it's like they are technically the same species, or come from like a similar beginning, but like maybe they do that whole like you're born as this, you're born as that, and that might give them a different role in a society that may have existed to some degree without Ganon's influence at all.
Yeah. Like, so by that, I mean, I really, really like that theory, because it's fun to like tie these things into like the real world, and like how various creatures work in this way, in this world. But that would basically mean that all of these Blinn enemies are one and the same species, and they just change appearance and abilities over time as they age.
Well, there could be other factors too. Like for instance, and I almost don't want to necessarily say this because I can't remember exactly how it works. But for instance, bees or larvae are transformed into drones specifically through the application of something we call royal jelly. They don't just change on their own. They require a catalyzing external factor. So it's possible that they're maybe they are the same species, but they don't. It like changing from one form to the other may not necessarily be a process of strictly aging. Maybe there is some kind of external factor on them,
Right.
or maybe it's something that's possible of going one way or the other, both with or without influence.
I see. Is this a form of metamorphosing? What the bees go through?
I don't know if you could call it a metamorphosis, because I don't think the change is drastic enough.
Right.
Like puberty isn't a metamorphosis. It's a big change, but it's like, metamorphosis, like thinking caterpillar to butterfly. That's a completely different organism from on one side or the other.
Oh yeah.
Like anatomically, they're nothing alike. Like not even in their basic structure. So, for instance, one has a soft outside and the other one has an exoskeleton. One has chewing mouth parts, the other has a proboscis. One has wings, the other doesn't. It's cilia at best. But, I don't think a lot more legs.
Oh yeah.
But, and that's not to say, like, there is the possibility, at least in my mind, that they had a form that was something else originally, and then Ganon or Ganondorf, whatever, sort of co-opted the species into his own role, like made them fulfill a role that maybe they weren't necessarily meant to fulfill.
Well, if you think about it, say Demise is... If all the goblins came from Demise, and if you subscribe to the theory that Ganondorf is basically a reincarnation of Demise's hatred, then it makes sense that they'd fall in league with him.
Right.
Since he is like the Demon King reborn and everything.
Right. But also, it's important to note that, like, Ganondorf is not Demise.
Oh,
yeah,
he's not Demise. Right. I feel like if it's a connection that,
Right. Well,
okay, how do I put it? Say if there's any similarity, it's so minuscule that you wouldn't notice it.
Right.
Like Ganon's his own person.
Right.
At the end of the day.
Of course. Oh, that's actually like that's what I meant.
Sorry.
I just want to say, like, the demons come from Demise. Like they start there. But with his destruction, that actually frees them to become their own organisms. And that's actually, I wasn't refuting what you were saying earlier. I'm enhancing it because that allows for them to essentially being like without their initial sort of directing force and the thing that actually brought them into being. It does allow them to suddenly become grounded in their environment and actually be free to be influenced by environmental factors and evolve much more in the way that we imagine creatures do today. So when I say that he's not Ganondorf, what I mean is that just because Ganondorf comes in, it's not like he's like, yes, I'm the spirit of Demise and I'm picking up the slack that I left off before. It's something totally new.
I don't think he knows.
Right.
How would he know?
Precisely.
Exactly.
I don't think he has any knowledge of the events of Skyward Sword or anything like that, or Demise or anything.
Yeah. I honestly think that
so
Ganondorf is the one most weakly tied to the whole resurrection thing, because it almost seems like he's the only one who doesn't actually know what he came from, because Demise was destroyed, and it's his curse of hatred that sort of twists and pulls the souls of the reincarnated Hylia and the reincarnated hero into this sort of endless spiral that they can't escape. This sort of helixing fate that binds them permanently to this path. Wherever it goes, like they're all stuck circling around it. But when Ganondorf comes back into the fold each time, like, it's not Demise's spirit necessarily reincarnated. It's more like just like a manifestation of his final will.
Precisely.
Like,
I was going to say, more his willpower, in a sense. And
right.
and something I think is kind of proof of this is that in Twilight Princess we have the Bulblins. They also appear in Spirit Tracks, but not as much.
Right.
But what I think is interesting with the Bulblins is that not only were they basically the first intelligent enemy we had in Zelda, besides like actual character enemies, like as an enemy kind, they were actually intelligent. They fought with some sort of strategy. They made food. They rode on boars. They had a leader who spoke, like all these things. And even at the end of that game, the last time you fight King Bulblin, he says something about I follow the strongest person, or like the strongest side or something, and then basically he changes sides. He stops following Ganondorf and all that. He starts following like a more light path. I'm assuming like that, at least that's what they're hinting at. And I think that's definitely proof that Ganondorf doesn't have any actual power over them. Like not at least not the way the mice did.
Right. But it's funny because we've been talking about the different.
Another thing about that, there were Bubblins in the Hidden Village, and they were just kind of like completely oblivious to what was going on outside. They were just in there kind of doing their own thing.
Are you sure?
Yeah, because remember Darbus says something about first the Hidden Village was blocked off for a really long time. There were those boulders, and then Darbus says something about those Bubblins were ancient and the remnants of like the army that originally went there and attacked.
I thought the block off had been more of a recent thing. I thought that those ones had been sent there to try to find like Impa or something. It's been a while since I played Twilight Princess, so I might just be remembering that wrong.
I might also be.
Oh, I remember that. I think I'm pretty much right on this.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I played Twilight Princess not too long ago, so I'm certain that was... He says something like that. I could always pull out the quote.
Oh, no, I trust you. I trust you.
Yeah. But yeah, so we were talking about the different, permutations of Blinn. And actually, right. Something kind of segueing from the me talking about the cycle is actually kind of plays into what I was sort of thinking about some of the other creatures. So, like, let's say you've got these bokoblins, and they exist in this world now, and then occasionally Ganondorf comes in and sort of like co-opts them and is like, okay, nope, you're doing my work now, and we're gonna do what I want to do, and so they sort of get organized societally for war. They get sort of pushed into service, and that's why you see like all these different creatures with various combat capabilities sort of squaring off against Link, because it's like again, let's say it's almost like the bees, where it's like you have different kinds of bees, but it's like, let's say somebody took like mental control of a beehive and was like, no, all of you are going to go fight. Some of them would be really good at it, and some of them would probably not be good at it. And so, kind of in like the way I look at it in my mind is that you have these cycles of environment being the evolution factor, like the thing that forces their changes and their behavioral evolution and their physical evolution, and then suddenly it's Ganondorf or Ganon or whatever evil is taking them over, and it sort of shoves them back into these roles. So every time that happens, I feel like there's an evolutionary press towards bigger, stronger, fiercer, meaner, more deadly.
Oh yeah.
And that's where like the larger moblins come in. That's why we start, like we said, Skyward Sword, Demise is the beginning. It's all the same bokoblin in the beginning, and then you get these bigger guys, and then they drop off, and then he comes back, and then you get this thing, and you get that thing. So
wait. So the other thing about Skyward Sword was moblins existed too, which I'll admit that I was confused on this because I didn't read the target lock info about moblins. So I thought that those ones with the shields for a while were big fat bokoblins, but they're actually moblins.
Right.
Exactly.
And what I'm saying is there might not be that big of a difference.
Yeah.
Like it's possible that moblins were given rise because either through like influencing magic or breeding or both, kind of like, the Urukai or something. Like, he turned moblins or bokoblins into moblins, or they sprang from them. But that's what I mean, is you...
Well, they were specifically called moblins,
right.
But I see what you're saying. Like, they took on their own different kind of form and stuff
right.
as time went on because of different influences.
Right. Like, for instance, you can... It's one of those things where I'm not sure moblins, when compared to bokoblins, are a species or a breed. Because when you're breeding something, like let's say Ganon or Ganondorf are breeding moblins and stuff for war, like he's massing his forces, like, and this is kind of like the goblins and orcs and Urukai, like you get the Urukai from the orcs, but they're not the same thing.
Oh, you're right.
So it's like maybe what was happening is he's like, okay, I'm taking... He's got bokoblins, right? Like, but they're not all maybe necessarily identical. Maybe one is a little bit stronger, or a little bit meaner, or a little bit fiercer, and he's like pushing them together, like, now kiss, and they breed, or whatever it is that they do to create. Exactly, okay, now I've got a slightly bigger, stronger, meaner moblin, and then I did that with this other ones, and now I took the two big, strong, mean ones and pushed them together, and like over time you get breeds by doing that. Like we do that with horses. Yeah. You it's called a selected trait. You find the thing that you want, and you keep breeding it so that the next things down the line...
Oh, like selective breeding.
Yeah, that's what that is. But you're selecting the traits, like the specific trait is what you're trying to breed for. So I'm saying that maybe moblins were given rise to by that happening, through the forced, essentially, breeding. Because, like, the thing is, breeding is essentially evolution. It's just that a person or some intelligent thing is the thing selecting the features that are allowed to pass down, as opposed to, that trait's ability to get food or water or have sex or something. So
right, it's like sped up, unnatural.
Well,
evolution.
I mean, technically the generations are happening at the same rate, but it's just
the
what the selecting force is. It just means that it's people and not nature.
Yeah, but I also feel like evolution wouldn't necessarily happen that quickly by itself.
Well, again, we don't know what... like, for instance, maybe there's magic involved with, like, speeding up their breeding, or who knows? Like, that's what I'm saying, is we don't necessarily get to see... I mean, we never see young ones, so... But there's that, but...
So, like, if you think about it, here's something... We don't really know the time gaps between games.
That's also true. But we can usually assume there's, like, at least a couple of generations between the games, like, for the most part, anyway.
Right. And that kind of gets me to what I wanted to talk about, too, because as you might have big, strong things occurring, like moblins, because they're being bred for, and then suddenly, Link, he come to town... and smites Ganon, and then Ganon's gone for a while.
Mickey comes to town.
But, yeah, little reference there. But now suddenly you have what used to be the biggest environmental influence in their change and their evolution on a physical and a societal and behavioral level is suddenly gone. So absent those pressures, what happens? More natural evolutionary pressures move in to take their place. So you start looking back at things like, can I find shelter? Can I find food? Can I find a mate? Can I eke out a living for myself? And I feel like that's where we get mini-blins. Because if you look at bokoblins and moblins, they're big, they're fierce, they eat mostly meats and like fish and things like that, or they might actively predate on their environment, or on the other organisms in their environment. They don't eat the grass in the hills, obviously. But that means that there's now probably food that they're not getting to, whereas you might have like smaller, weaker bokoblins that are the runts of the litter, so to speak, that get shoved off to the side by the bigger, stronger ones vying for power or doing whatever it is that they do best. And suddenly you've got these little things that could like fit a new niche, in the environment. Like they're smaller, maybe more adaptive. These ones, they're quick, they're agile, they can scale vertical surfaces. They seem to have a different way of operating, the mini blins. And
Exactly.
like maybe they can more easily get to food that the other ones either can't get to or won't get to. And
Precisely.
that's
And
because like
not just that. Like I feel like they wouldn't need as much food to survive as well. Like seeing as they were so much smaller.
exactly. Well, evolution is just how good are you at doing your thing. Like, you don't
Exactly.
need to evolve bigger, stronger, more powerful. I mean, the smallest
Yeah.
and nearly most inconsequential organisms on this planet to us are also, like, the most successful, like insects and bacteria and things, simply because they found a different way of doing.
Yeah.
So, like, I feel like that's where you get things like mini-blins, is these
Precisely, yeah.
long
I think that
stretches
makes-
of Ganon-less existence. Because,
Yeah,
I mean...
think that makes a lot of sense, and it does make a lot of sense because I think isn't the first time we see book or mini blins, like timeline wise and also game release wise is Wind Waker.
Yep. And what happened in Wind Waker?
Even in the timeline, there's nothing.
Yeah, no
there
more
are
Ganon.
no mini blins before that.
Yep.
Precisely, he had been gone for ages, like so long ago that they don't even remember that there's a land beneath the surface. So that's
Right.
gonna be a long ass time.
Exactly.
So that makes a lot of sense.
And then again, it comes back to when Ganon finally comes back. It's like, oh, nope, it doesn't matter what all the Blins were doing. He scoops them all up and is like, nope, you're fighting now. Which is why you get swarmed by these clearly inferior combatants who... I mean, let's just face it. You see them, you hear them coming, and you just get out the skull hammer, and you grin, and you wind up, and you hit a home run, because clearly those poor things were not meant to be fighting the hero. And
They can be so annoying
sad.
though. Like when you're
Yeah.
like doing the Forsaken Fortress the first time, you have no weapons and you're trying to climb up a ladder, and they're just knocking you down. Constantly.
When you're unarmed is literally the only time they're a threat. Every other time they're a joy. Unless you can't take their sounds, then they're terrible. But I love the little noise, so...
Yeah. Yeah, they were great. They were really a great addition, I think, to Zelda.
And then, I mean, you have, on the far end of that spectrum of evolving bigger, badder, stronger, you have the Hinoxes, which look like they
Precisely.
might be the sort of pinnacle in terms of physical evolution of...
Exactly.
The other-
I was gonna get to that as well. They because at least looking at the Breath of the Wild designs, comparing a Breath of the Wild Bokoblin to a Breath of the Wild Hinox, the only real difference is the size and the eyes. Like that's really the only difference, really. So I think that's they have to be related, like, somehow.
Possible some kind of correlating mutation.
Yeah.
Because they also...
And then of course there's...
Because the one thing to notice about the Hinoxes is that they're solitary. Like all the other Blins and all the other, I guess we'll just call them evil species, they're actually capable of cohabitating and cooperating. You see them sitting around fires together, communicating with each other, sharing food, sharing stories. They exist, they coexist peacefully. And then you have the Hinoxes, which... If you look at their territories, even when they're in, like, forested areas, the areas where they're sleeping is, like, there's no trees by it. Like, they must have pounded everything down or broken everything or uprooted everything that was, like, their little spot. And you never see... There's never, like, a camp close by. There's never any Hinox that responds to, like, an alarm. Like, when they blow a horn to let everyone know that you're there. There's never, like, a Hinox either chained up or otherwise. You never see them leading a group. Like, they don't even find... like in D&D, you have creatures called bugbears, which they're not orcs, they're not goblins, they're kind of closely related, but you also find them, like, if you find a bugbear, like, chances are there's, like, goblins and hobgoblins and stuff that it has basically bullied into, like, no, you're living with me, and you're gonna help me out, and you're gonna get me food, because I'm big and strong, and I can pummel you into the dirt. Like, you never even see a Hinox that seems to have sort of co-opted a group of, let's say, bokoblins. They are completely solitary.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, what would have led them to behave that way?
Who knows? I mean, it could be a vein of magic that's still in there. Like maybe every now and then some sort of magical influence, whatever, is kind of stuck in their bloodline, and it just every now and then maybe you have one that crops up. Like when you're working with genetics and breeding, you sometimes have traits that seem to disappear or go recessive, and then every now and then they just crop up in something that That, like when an entire family of people with perfect vision have a kid with glasses. Or, recessive alleles can work very strangely, but it could be something that it's very hard to breed for, but every now and then just pops up out of nowhere.
And then now we're really only talking about the Hinoxes in Breath of the Wild right now, because looking at the Hinox in A Link to the Past, for example, they do work in groups.
They do.
So it really, I guess it depends a lot.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm not sure how to approach that one.
I'm not entirely sure either. I just thought about it.
Well, I mean, they're also morphologically they're pretty different as well. They're much smaller, for one.
They're much smaller and a lot more human-like in their body structure, I guess.
Yeah. Also, they throw bombs. Where are they getting the bombs?
I don't know.
They're
just carrying around.
They've evolved bombs. Wow, amazing.
That is quite the feat. And then, of course, we got the Big Blins, and as far as I know, they only appear post Wind Waker. On the timeline, like I know for a fact they're in Spirit Tracks.
Are they only in the handheld games?
Phantom Hourglass.
Because I feel like I remember, but the only one I can concretely remember is the one that attacks the train. I can't really remember any others. But also,
I can also think of that one.
I only ever played Phantom Hourglass with the one time. Not to say I hated it or anything. Somebody stole my copy of it, and I never really ended up buying it again.
No, I gotcha. That sucks though. But yeah, it's. I mean, I feel like they should be also related, to the Bokoblin family. And they're probably pretty similar to Moblins, I imagine. Like they're big Blin. So Charles, do you have anything to say about Balblins?
Yeah, so what I was gonna say was the Bubblins are all kind of grouped together. They have that little area just before the Arbiter's grounds. It's like a camp. They had one of those hogs on a spigot. I don't remember what it's called. Shoot, you ride them in the desert.
Oh, Bulbos.
Yeah, a Bobo. They had that on a spigot. They're cooking it. They got a fire going. There's Bubblins up on watchtowers.
Exactly.
They're not separated doing their own thing. They got a clan thing going on.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I mentioned earlier when I talked a little bit about how the Bulblins they choose a new side at the end of Twilight Princess and all that. They're definitely at the time in the timeline they really are the only intelligent enemy monsters. And at the time also as canonically or chronologically or whatever, as we had seen the games, they were really the first enemies we fought that were intelligent to that extent. Until Breath of the Wild, in which almost all of the enemies kind of are on that same level. But at the time, they were very unique.
So, do you want to hear my theory about them?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
So, sorry if I'm going to suck the air out of the room again. I apologize. But, back to
Go for it.
evolution. First I'll state my theory, or my idea plainly, is that they are a relative, a species that was related to Bokoblins, but I feel like they're a much more advanced species, kind of how we as humans became the dominant ape on the planet. I feel like they're a species that's on their way to that, and there's a lot of kind of evidence or clues you can look at. You see, one of the single biggest factors in evolution and speciation is isolation. That's why Darwin's finches and a lot of those other species on the Galapagos Islands, and go to places like Australia, anything that's an island or somehow separated by harsh climate or harsh conditions from everywhere else, you see a lot more like specialization in the creatures that live there because the environment demands it, and because they're also isolated from things that are outside that are possibly more like generalist survivors. So it really gives their sort of breeding pool a chance to enhance these traits quickly. So they bear a lot of evidence of being desert dwellers. Deserts isolate. Deserts are harsh. Deserts force evolution. But you see a lot of these things that puts them ahead of your standard rabble of bokoblins, which, bokoblins know how to fight, they know how to make primitive tools, they're like Neanderthals, They can do things, they have societal structures, but they're not super advanced. But if you look at the Bulblins, it's almost like they're more like Homo erectus, They go so much further because they really know how to live in their environment. They create clothing, they create weapons, like advanced weapons, even like, bows and things like that. And they seem to have the ability to coordinate. They use pack tactics instead of attacking in a rabble. Like maybe some of them will be riding bulbos as cavalry, like coming in with melee weapons, while one person steers the animal, the other one attacks from the back. And they'll use mixed unit tactics. Like some of the cavaliers will be mounted archers, and they'll try to flank Link in like Hyrule Field or something. But also, I hadn't thought of this during our previous conversation, but Charles, you made me think about this. They also do something that no other species, no other Blinn species does, and that is definitely an indicator of like actual evolution, like cognitive evolution, like brain becoming more advanced. Is they domesticate. Because you said they use the bulbos, but they use them for multiple purposes. They use them for mounts, and they use them for food, which makes it. And they have pens. They have training. They can actually force an individual of a species that has been domesticated into one role or another, which that's a societal intent. That's not an accident. That's not, oh look, we found a herd of cows and we ate some of them. And it's...
Exactly, yeah, they're definitely very intelligent.
Right. So, and of course, they speak.
Exactly. Which I think is the only... even in Breath of the Wild, none of the enemies really ever speak.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they're definitely way
only
ahead.
King Boblin speaks.
True, it's only the king that actually speaks.
That's true.
I think we can sort of assume...
And wasn't it like... It wasn't articulated speech, it was like... I follow he who's strongest.
Well, he did.
Well, no, he spoke sentences, like he spoke complete sentences, and he was kind of terse, He didn't say a lot, but he didn't necessarily have to. But we don't.
You can also see like he was very, very injured at the time.
Well, also
that would also
just because he's the only one we heard speak, Hylian or Hyrulean or whatever. Doesn't necessarily mean the others weren't capable. They just didn't really need to. They were speaking their own...
And the others... The others aren't really characters either. Like, he's the only character Boblin that we ever see.
And if you think about it, that makes him the franchise's only, bilingual monster. Because, clearly to lead his own people, he must speak, we'll just call it Blinn, whatever their language is. And that language clearly isn't anything that's rooted in any of the languages of Hyrule. So, man.
Exactly, yeah.
So that was fascinating.
Definitely very interesting. So, how about we move on to a different sort of subtopic, different sort of enemies. I have, it's another group of enemies, and we talked about them a little bit last time we spoke, which was off recording, is the reptile Foz enemies, which include three types, being the Lizalfos, Dynalfos, and Errolfos. Even though Errolfos are definitely more different than the other two, they're still, I guess, there. Yeah, as I said, Lizalfos and Dynalfos, definitely similar.
I'm totally not scrolling up to find our pictures, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not even going to. Okay, so Dynalphos and Lizalphos. Both were in Twilight Princess, I think. Right?
Right.
But not Ocarina of Time.
They were.
They are?
They are. Although they're very, very like. I think they only appear like once or twice. Like the Dynalphos only appear like once or twice.
They're both in Majora's Mask, I think.
Right.
They're a lot more. I think they are in both. They're a lot more in Majora's Mask.
Right.
They are very, very.
Well, I think
in
Ocarina of Time there were both Lizalfos and Dynalphos, but I think there's only Dynalphos in Majora's Mask.
That might be true, actually.
I'm not 100% sure of that, but I think that's the way it was. But
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and so.
And then obviously. No.
No, you talk.
Obviously, Twilight Princess introduced the Lizalfos. Or sorry, the Arelphos.
Right. Yes.
Which are definitely more different from the other two.
Right. And those ones are so fascinating to me, but I want you guys to talk about the Lizalfos first.
Yeah. So, Charles, you haven't said a whole lot. Is there anything you want to analyze or discuss about those?
Yeah. You're going to have to give me a second, though. I'm going to have to scroll up for that.
Yeah. Remember when I said I'm not looking at them? That was a lie.
Oh, and for the record,
no.
I'm going to put images of these up on in the actual video. Yeah. So for those of you who are listening, if you're just listening and if you're doing something else, if you know that usually it's like nothing to see in this video, I will probably put in like images of these just to compare so you can see like the differences between the different similar species and whatnot in this specific video. Just letting you know that watching the video can give you some benefit,
Right. We might want to. Maybe you can put a little blurb in the beginning that's like, "Hey, we're actually going to throw some pictures up for the discussion." So that way people know to be looking for this whole time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Twilight Princess. They both look the same. There's definitely a similarity there. The Lizalfos are the more primitive form, I think. Yeah, because, like, they don't have a lot of armor on. But then we have the Dynalphos, and they have, like, full body armor on. And they have, like...
Right.
They have, like, chainmail on.
Yeah.
And they're wearing a helmet.
Yeah.
I think it's funny to point out that the Lizalfos, they just have a blade sort of, like, lashed to their tail, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. He just has it tied on with like a rope.
Yeah.
And but the Dynalphos, he has it implemented into his armor.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of cute. Like the Lizalfos are made kind of cute almost in that regard.
Yeah.
But it's also like I guess overall, like throughout all the games, like all the games that have both, or all the areas or whatever that have both of those enemies, the Dynalphos are always the more fierce ones.
Yeah. And then we got like the Arialphos. I don't know if I said that right.
I usually say it like Arialphos.
Who knows?
But I might be wrong.
I just say Arelphos. But I mean, whoever knows. People pronounce Deku in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah,
so.
True.
Yeah. So the Arialphos, I mean, it's kind of hard to say with them because I feel like, they were up in the city in the sky, they got wings, but they're so drastically, different from the Dynalphos and Lizalfos. They do have, like, the Phos at the end of their name. They might have a common ancestor.
I don't know.
But, like, I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you can use the Phos thing because you also have like Stalfos.
Exactly. I was gonna say
those aren't related at all. But
these they're at least all reptiles.
Right.
Like, yeah, they're definitely reptiles, and we can throw the Phos thing out. I wasn't really thinking about Stalfos and all that, but I feel like it's hard to establish a connection between, Arialphos and other reptiles, because, like, how did they get wings?
Precisely, but I feel like in the magical world like this, with a little bit of evolution and a little bit of magic. I feel like the combination of the two could probably eventually, given enough time and magic and evolution, bring us the Aerolphos.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but then you gotta wonder, like, what magic was involved, like, who wanted them that way.
Right. I don't know.
Like, maybe that big dinosaur, whatever its name was, the boss in the City of the Sky.
Thing?
Yeah. That boss.
Argarok?
Yeah, Argarok. Maybe
like
Argarok wanted them that way.
Although there are also Aerolphos in Hyrule Castle in Twilight Princess. So
yeah, you're right about that.
Wait, I didn't... I had a little bit of static there. I didn't hear what you just say.
He said that there
are
also Aerolphos in the Hyrule Castle.
Exactly. They're not just in the sky.
Right.
So they do exist in Hyrule as well, like on the surface, on the ground. But yeah, who knows what could have sparked them to turn out the way they did.
Right.
That's, I guess, going into those sorts of theories, I think would mostly be some pretty far-fetched ideas. But I at least like to think that they are somehow related to the Lizalfos and Dinalfos.
Right. Well.
Even though probably very, very far.
Yeah, it's probably... See, well, that might be part of it. You see, we're thinking of like, well, how does this thing change from this to this to this? And we might be thinking about that the wrong way. It's more likely that you don't go. This almost feels like the if we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? The answer is no. We both came from something else a long time ago. So
yeah,
you probably have two, like a distant ancestor that diverged, and along one path you have Lizalfos and Dinalfos, which do seem to be a sort of like very closely related to each other. And then you have the Aerolphos, which probably is the current extant product of that offshoot where they both split off quite a while ago, because it's way more adapted to its environment and its behavior. Like structurally, if you're looking at, like, we're using the Twilight Princess as, because they're all from the same game. So if you look at the Lizalfos, they have like they're broad and they're boxy. They have stout bodies, they have strong limbs, they have arms that are significantly larger than their legs, like they're relatively stumpy legs, but long arms with large claws. They have relatively like rectangular or squared off jaws. Their eyes are sort of set in their head, and they have these big, heavy looking, painful teeth. Whereas the Aerolphos has a more lithe body. Its arms and legs are the same size. Its tail maybe should have been a little bit more developed. But then you look at its head is flat, wedge-shaped, triangular, and it has small teeth because, teeth are heavy. They're lots of bone, so if you've got little ones in your jaw, that's going to cut down on the weight. And then if you look at their eyes, they're large and bulbous, and they sort of bug out of the top of their heads, which would probably give them a lot better of a field of vision. Like they can look around and see a lot more. So, range of vision and acuity of vision are something that aerial predators require. Like they have to be able to focus. And if you look at the way their heads are flat, so like they don't have something that's getting in the way of their eyes, like the fields of vision of each eyeball crossing. So they probably have very good binocular vision as well.
Yeah.
They do have teeth?
Precisely.
They do have very small teeth. I think. It looks like it anyway.
Right.
It's hard to make out.
I mean, they probably do
have to be
teeth,
small.
Although, yeah,
small.
Exactly, very small. They'd have to be, because we can't really see them very well. But there should be teeth, seeing as they are reptiles after all. They're not birds.
No, I guess it is Aerolphos. I don't know why I always pronounce the E in there. Oh, you know what? It doesn't look like they do, actually, now that I'm looking at a much bigger picture. Yeah.
I like to think they do, although they're probably very, very small.
I guess it's just that one picture, but I don't think
Precisely.
they have teeth.
Well,
Yeah.
a lot of times you see things that fly. The things they predate on tend to be significantly smaller. You know, like a wolf
yeah.
or a group of wolves can take down big game. A bear can take down a deer. That's while you wouldn't necessarily say they're the same size, it's like the same size category. Obviously, the bear is bulkier,
Yeah.
way bulkier. But like if you look at flying things, they take out they're like insectivores or something. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely
and
much
you
much much
don't
smaller.
really need teeth to eat a bug. You kind of just need to swallow it and let the insides do the work. Which is again, that's something that you see in a lot of a lot of reptiles, but also a lot of flying things because the traits are the same. It's minimal or minimizing the required number of features and structures in order to, consume and digest your food. Because
Right.
when
I
you
mean,
save
even
on
reptiles, they don't all chew.
right,
Even all reptiles don't. Like
yeah.
say snakes.
In fact,
they
most
usually
don't.
swallow their
Yeah,
food,
well,
yeah.
I mean, reptile teeth tend to be for gripping. They don't
Right.
require a lot of
Or
mastication.
poisoning, or
Though that too.
yeah.
So holding or immobilizing or capturing prey tend to be the sole function of reptilian teeth. And sometimes they don't. So they tend to be little spurs or studs. Maybe they face backwards like a snake. To basically the whole job is to stop things from getting back out until the tongue and the muscles of the throat can suck it down. And
Right. So I guess it doesn't. It does make sense that they wouldn't necessarily need teeth.
Right.
The arrow flows. Yeah, that's interesting.
And it also makes sense why they have a smaller, thinner, frailer looking jaw, because they're not necessarily needing to hold massive, struggling prey or rip big, sinewy, muscular like bodies apart like and tear off huge chunks of food. Like if you look at a crocodile, their whole face is muscle and anger. That's all it is. It's meant to hold the thing that's struggling for dear life, might even be bigger than the crocodile, and is maybe also kicking it in the face a little bit. But if you're eating maybe large bugs, like bats, they eat bugs. Birds, a lot of birds catch bugs. It's the difference, the size and bulk difference in predator and prey is monumental when you're looking at most, not all, but most things that fly. And
right, and also I feel like arrowfoes, they're intelligent enough to kill their prey with other means, like with weaponry or with other means. And they I mean, they could probably eat rats and like bigger things like that, like swallow it whole.
Well,
like snakes.
and again, that's actually indicative of something else, especially in our world. Things that fly also tend to trend trending towards intelligence is something that evolution does a lot. Not all the time, but a lot. It's one of those features that's pretty much always a positive survival trait. And flying things in our world also tend to just be smarter on average than a lot of animals. Like look at, like crows in Japan building dummy nests to slow down workers that are trying to remove their nests because they're getting in the way of power lines. And it also means if you're there was this case in Japan where like they had all these crows that were building nests in the power lines, and the city, obviously this is causing infrastructure problems, so the city hires a bunch of people to go out and pull down the nests, and instead of getting rid of them, it ended up causing a bigger problem because the crows would start building like 3 times more nests. Because it served a dual purpose. One, it meant workers would waste time and energy taking down nests that weren't being lived in. And if they did happen to get you, because now they've only got a 1 in 3 chance for every one they take down being an inhabited nest, if they take down your nest, there's another one just ready to move into. They've also been documented using correct change to pay for food from vending machines.
What? No way.
I kid you not.
That's insane.
Exactly. And so it makes sense that like their habits and because also if you look at the because again when we're talking about intelligence, you also see behavioral and co-behavioral changes. So when you fight Dinalfos and Lizalfos in Twilight Princess, they just kind of run up at you and kick and swing and their tails and try to hit you. But the aerial Phos work in coordinating pairs, attacking from multiple directions and diving from behind you.
Precisely. Yeah, they're definitely smarter. They're more strategic.
Right. And
Very
honestly,
interesting. And then, sadly, or maybe it's a good thing, in the real world, we have no flying reptiles.
powered flight, no.
Right. Well, yeah, true.
We used to though.
Uh,
They were called.
we used
They
to.
were called the pterosaurs, although I don't think they were technically
Yeah.
reptiles. But Quetzalcoatlus had a 40-foot
Yeah, but
wingspan.
I don't know. That's a hard. Yeah. And we have no dragons, because that's basically what the Aerolphos are. Because they have 6 limbs, counting the wing-sized limbs.
Yep.
We don't have anything like that besides
Nope.
insects in the real world.
No hexapodal reptilia. But
Right.
But it's funny you mentioned dragons. Going back to we'll say non-Twilight Princess oriented reptilian enemies. That was the big difference between a Lizalfos and a Dynalfos. Was Dynalfos breathed fire. So in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, they just kick off and like, oh god. If you were a Deku scrub, you were toast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of wish they had brought back the fire-breathing Dynalphos for Twilight Princess, because in Twilight Princess, the Lizalfos and Dynalphos, they don't feel all that different. Like the Dynalphos are much heavier armored and they're stronger, but they're not all that different. So it would have been awesome, I think, if they could have breathed fire in that game as well.
Well, they had
would have differentiated them.
In Ocarina of Time, they had like a very different look, like a design look to them, because the Lizalfos were kind of like an Anoli, they were slender jawed and kind of not frail, but like they were kind of thin, a little lanky.
Absolutely.
And then the Dynalphos, were like
they stood very much upright.
right, but they had skinny bodies and skinny limbs and were fast and agile. And then the Dynalphos were a little bit bulkier, and they had like a big sort of boxy jaw, and they looked more like iguanas. Like they had the line of triangular scutes or scales that kind of moved along like their faces. At least if I am remembering them correctly.
Yeah, no, I remember the same thing. Absolutely.
But I guess that's the design that also kind of got used for the Hyrule Warrior, the Dynalphos that appear in Hyrule Warriors. So you can kind of see,
I think so,
they had those like more like an iguana face.
Precisely, yeah. And obviously they've changed a lot. Like looking at the Lizalfos design in Breath of the Wild, they look a lot more like chameleons.
Yeah.
Than anything else. And they had never really looked like that in any of the previous Zelda games. But I like the design. And I mean, it has its perks. Having eyes like that, they can keep track of a lot of things at the same time, So I mean, I feel like that's an advantage, an evolutional advantage.
Yes, absolutely.
And the Lizalfos in Breath of the Wild can breathe fire.
Yep, the red Lizalfos can.
So,
that's very true.
So that's back, yeah.
That almost makes me think it's one of those things that doesn't necessarily imply that they're directly related because they share a thing. It's more like two offshoots just also developing like a similar trait, which does actually happen. I don't remember the word for it though. I used to. But there's a this isn't exactly the concept, but there's this idea of something called an analogous structure. Like it's basically when two species that are not related or not closely related develop the ability to do the same thing, or a structure that performs the same function but is not even closely related. So I think the sort of what I remember from like high school textbooks, one of the big examples of an analogous structure is wings. Like bugs have wings and birds have wings, but birds and bugs are not related. They're not even close.
Oh yeah.
And those wings are designed a totally different way and perform a completely different function. A bug's wing is rigid. It's made out of chitin. It functions more by moving in like a weird sort of semicircle, whereas like a bird uses like powered flexing flight. It's its flight feathers and its bones, and it's yes, both have wings and both can fly, but you can't use that to relate them to each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, so I was thinking, unless you have anything more to add on the reptilian Foss enemies.
I do.
Right, go for it. Go
Yeah.
for it.
In Skyward Sword, the Lizalfos could breathe fire.
Oh. Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah, you're right. That totally slipped my mind. That's true. So, yeah, and that takes place way before all this. Maybe they could breathe fire in Ocarina of Time as well. They just chose not to. I don't know.
Or maybe they lost the trait because they lived somewhere it wasn't necessary.
Right. That's also.
I mean,
because there's many years between all of these games. So.
And well, I mean, on the one hand, I would be inclined to say like, why breathe fire? It's because you need to burn something. But if you live in a volcano, why would you need to burn something? But then, Dodongos breathe fire, so...
Right.
Maybe, I wonder if Dodongos are related. They don't really share many
Dodongos,
similarities.
I mean, they are reptiles.
Yeah, but they're two-legged and stomp around and breathe fire and show no sign of intelligence whatsoever.
Yeah, they're definitely way less
intelligent. Even the biggest and strongest among them, counting Ocarina of Time, he'll eat anything you shove in his stupid face. And even going back to, the original Legend of Zelda Dodongos, the Triceratops-looking ones, 4 legs, still plods around like an idiot, still swallows a bomb you put right in front of its face. After it explodes in his stomach, we'll do it again. So...
Right, and while the Ocarina of Time Lizalfos might not be civilized exactly, they're still intelligent enough to, wear armor and use weapons and stuff.
Yeah. Develop weapons, actually. Because again, they've put something on their tail, which turns it into a weapon. And those gauntlets look pretty specialized. Like I don't think they just found those. Because there's a whole...
Wait, the Ocarina of Time?
No. I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about the Skyward Sword ones.
Or Twilight Princess?
No, I thought we were talking about Skyward Sword. They have the big gauntlets on their hands, the big old fist.
Oh yeah, they attack with those.
Yep. Right. And they use them as cover too. Remember, they move the shield part of it to block, and then if you don't do it right, they hit you with their tail or something.
Oh yeah, that's right. So anyway, what I was gonna get to, I think unless you have anything more to add on these reptiles, before we move on from the Foss discussion, there was one thing I wanted to talk. I mean, obviously, Stalfos aren't a species exactly. They're more than likely they're undead Hylians in most cases. But what I wanted to discuss a little bit, because in Skyward Sword there are 4-armed Stalfos. What were they when they were living?
Good God, I have no idea. If anything, I would think they are something I would probably say, that's a magical construction. Like, that doesn't seem right.
Could be. Like, it's either that, they use an additional 2 arms just to get better as a style enemy, or they were actually, like, some sort of 4-armed humanoid race when they lived, which obviously we haven't ever seen anything like that in Zelda, but I don't know. It would be interesting, maybe, if there were.
I would assume that they're a necromantic creation,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because, let's see.
So, apparently, Spiritual Mask Salesman has to go to bed.
Did he say he had to go to bed?
He said so in the chat, but so I guess we can't do much about that. But we'll continue the discussion.
Okay.
We can't really do much. I mean, that I feel like we have to. Are there any certain things that you're interested in discussing a little bit about, talking about? Any certain species or?
Yes. Octoroks.
Octoroks. Ooh. I actually sort of had those on my list as well. So yeah, you can start.
Well, I don't even remember why I originally thought about them. I think it was one of those things where I would just hear. It might have been actually from an episode of Game Grumps, like Aaron or somebody going like, where do they get their rocks from? And then I started thinking about it. I was like, where do they get their rocks from? And I just, from there, like, my brain just kind of, like, started firing on that subject. And I feel like I don't think they're rocks. There.
Yeah, it would be weird if they were actually rocks.
Well, they're uniform. Like, every time it spits a rock, it's the same rock. And so here's what I think, is that whether they are land-dwelling or aquatic, they have access to dirt and sediment. And so what I think they do is like birds have a gizzard. It's like it's an organ where they keep stones that fulfill a purpose. What I think is, though maybe not necessarily like a gizzard, I think Octoroks have a structure that allows them to like gather dirt and silt and compact it. Maybe there's like a mucus or some kind of biological, produced goo or something they have that allows them to sort of compress and harden dirt and then spit it as a defense. And like, so when you see them in the water and they keep shooting at you, it's not like they have this endless supply of rocks in their tiny little bulbous bodies. They're just, they're like kicking up their tentacles and like stirring dirt up into the water maybe, or maybe they've gathered some and they can suck it in and squish it into a ball and shoot it. Because every time they hit you, they like in Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild, they just kind of break apart. Yeah. It's not like a big stone. Right. It's just like a compacted material that just hits you, and it's weak. Like if you got shot with a rock, it would hurt. But they tend to be some of the weakest enemies in the game. So it's kind of like they're having a dirt ball fight.
I mean, they're accurate as hell.
That too.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
Which again would imply would imply a uniform consistency. If they can keep shooting it.
I like that.
But I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on Octoroks. That's not even a discussion.
Right. No, I like that idea. And obviously, we've seen plenty of different varieties of Octoroks.
Right.
Like, one's in the sea, one's in the river, one's on the walking on the land.
There's even ones that fly.
Hiding under the ground. Sort of. Oh yeah, there are. Yeah, like they're everywhere. But I mean, it makes sense that they would have a common ancestry and, just having evolved ever so slightly differently. But I had one thing on the Octoroks. So, if you look at the design of the Octoroks in Ocarina of Time, for example, they have these, like, snouts, mouths, like, pretty, like, upward eyes, like, almost like snaily eyes, or however you describe it. And then take a look at the Parella from Skyward Sword.
With
they're obviously not
the what?
Like the water intelligent creatures. They're obviously not exactly the same, but I feel like there are noteworthy differences.
What?
Or not noteworthy similarities.
The audio got a little tricky there. The what from? What do you?
The Parella, the jellyfish, intelligent people. Do you know them?
No.
I'll send you a picture real quick. There will be a picture on screen. That doesn't work. Excuse me. I'll change this real quick. There.
Oh, those things. Yes, I'd completely forgotten about them. Well, for some reason, I think you said Skyward Sword. I was thinking of Wind Waker for some reason. I was like, what?
Oh, I see. No, but so in Skyward Sword, which is the first game on the timeline, we have these creatures which speak and like they're intelligent and all. And then we see Octoroks in Ocarina of Time many hundred years later. They look pretty similar, but they're not intelligent, or at least they don't seem intelligent. And I wonder, is there a correlation there? I don't know.
I don't know. Like offhand, I don't think that I would say that they look related. At least if they are, it's very, very distant.
Right.
Because...
Yeah, I don't know.
But, I mean, who knows? Again...
I mean, it would absolutely be different, distant, definitely.
One of the fun things in this kind of discussion with Zelda franchises is that we never have any idea of what time span we're talking about, so it's kind of hard to
right.
say, like, well, this thing would have had, X number of thousands of years worth to change. It's like...
Yeah, that is an issue.
doesn't really help us, because we have no frame of reference for how much time should go by. So...
that is hard. That makes it... That does make it very hard.
Yep.
Oh, well.
Well, I mean, in Breath of the Wild, it's kind of interesting because I think that's actually the first time we see different kinds of Octoroks existing together. In previous games, it's either they were land-based or they were aquatic.
Well, actually, that's not entirely true.
Really?
Because in Ocarina of Time, we have the big Octo as the mini-boss in Jabu Jabu's belly, and that one walks around.
Oh, that is true. I mean, it does... It is still an aquatic environment.
An
I mean, disregarding the fact that it's, inside Jabu Jabu, that arena actually has water at the bottom.
It does.
So,
although very, very shallow.
Right.
But yeah, you're right.
But also it's a significantly more moist environment, because, like, the big difference between things that are aquatic and things that are not is how easily do they rehydrate. Like frogs, even though they can be on land, they don't drink water, they absorb it through their skin. So if they're in a completely dry climate, they'll just die. Can't get more wet and humid than inside a body. So I feel like though it's still walking around, I don't think that it qualifies as something that, like, is a terrestrial creature. I've been saying land-based or land-dwelling a lot, and aquatic. It's aquatic and terrestrial.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I don't really imagine seeing it walking, like, around Hyrule Field.
Right. But it is interesting.
Yeah, that would be
because weird. Like in Breath of the Wild, again, you have fully terrestrial Octoroks, like the forest ones. They live in the dirt. They don't go into the water. And then you have the fully aquatic ones, the ones that just kind of spend their time in lakes and rivers and pester you with rocks. I mean, compacted dirt balls.
Precisely. Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely a very diverse species.
Yes. They're always just really rewarding to kill, too. I love how...
Yeah, they usually
I love how no matter where you hit them, you get the critical hit ding.
In Breath of the Wild, yeah. Yeah, because they're basically just a head.
They really are. They really are.
They're just a big head.
The funny thing, it's like, you get the headshot, the critical hit. It's like, rewarded. But this one, it's like, I want to see if I can shoot its tentacle to make it a normal hit. That's the trick shot there.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is the River Zoras and the Zoras.
So like,
I think that
Zoras and Zolas.
Interesting one. Well, yeah, whatever you want to refer to them as, but yeah, like we have the more wild River Zoras, and then we have the more civilized Zoras.
Yes.
In different games, I don't think they ever appear in the same games.
No, they do. You have
do they?
Kind of like in A Link Between Worlds. Are
there regular Zoras there?
Well, they don't look like the ones we know from like Ocarina of Time, but they are Zoras in that game, and they talk to you. They don't attack you and all that other stuff. And then, like, for instance, when you get like used to the waterways in I can't remember, Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, they both kind of do this. Basically, you get warned, like, like, us here, we're good. We won't kill you, but, can't say the same thing about the more wild ones in the river. And at that point, I don't think you're talking about a species difference. I think you're just talking about, like, maybe a tribe or a society.
Right, yeah, more something like that. Yeah, that makes sense. But they are definitely they look more like what we've come to know more as River Zoras, I guess, since the first Zelda game. Like we've had the River Zoras. The regular Zoras, or whatever you want to call them, the way they appear in like Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild, like they're always civilized,
right?
And I've kind of come to think of them as the elves of the Zelda world,
right?
Like, and in my opinion, anyway. And even in Breath of the Wild, we learned that they age to become very, 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 very
right.
old, which kind of strengthens that.
Yeah.
Making them even more elf-like. Even though they are a water race, they're still, I'd say, Hyrule's elves.
Right, and well, what's funny is like they also don't change very much because you have a lot of games basically starting, in terms of what order the games are made. Ocarina of Time, you have them appearing in that sort of statuesque, like beautiful fish people that don't hork rocks at you and spit fire. But also, if you're looking at something like Breath of the Wild showcasing their extraordinary longevity, that's also going to slow down their evolution, because evolution is changing between generations. And if you birth a new generation every 150 years or something, you're not going to change very quickly. Because, you had in that game, Zora's talking to you like, yeah, I remember this thing happened. It was a while ago. And then you talk to Hylians and they're like, my grandfather told me about. So to some of them, it's like a distant memory.
A lot of the Zoras... Yeah, precisely, and a lot of the Zoras remember you.
Right.
Like, remembers Link.
They're like, oh yeah, Link, buddy, we used to hang out, remember? No.
Right? Yeah. Poor Zoras.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, that's interesting. And I guess that also sort of brings us into the Rito, the Rito discussion. Seeing as they are, according to Wind Waker, definitely, like, there's been some evolution between the Zora and the Rito.
I know, and I hate it. It's so dumb. I hate that I have to accept it because the producer, the designer of the game himself said this was our intention. It's they evolved from one to the other, but it's kind of this flies in the face of the discussion we're having because we're talking about pressures, like environmental pressures exerted on something to force it to evolve. And if the world becomes a giant ocean and you're a waterborne species, you just hit the jackpot. Why the hell would you evolve into a bird? It makes no sense.
I have two potential explanations for that. One of them being that, one of them, I guess, involving more like having a hand of magic in there, being that with Hyrule being flooded by the goddesses of all people, or well, I guess they're not people, but whatever. They didn't want anyone to discover the land beneath the surface, so they, in one way or another, took away the Zora's swimming capabilities, and placed them on this island, or had them wound up on this island where they were granted scales by this dragon that gave them wings at puberty or whatever,
So basically, that's evolution through divine intervention. That's essentially a patron deity just going like the goddesses are just like, hey Jaboon, like change them, okay? And then he's like, okay, and then just like, you're not fish people anymore. I'm gonna go take a vacation.
Well, what I think
this is your new patron deity. He'll give you wings. Like that's not evolution. That's the exact opposite of evolution.
It's definitely not evolution, and I said that's my weakest reasoning. Evolution-wise, that's my weakest reasoning out of my two reasonings. But also, I'm pretty sure that the Zora lost their swimming capabilities before they gained their flying capabilities. Like I think there was a time, maybe I don't know, maybe 2 or so generations, or maybe more, when they couldn't really do either all that well. I imagine.
But
because I don't think they could immediately start flying.
I just realized something that's so mean. Because if you think about it, that's like, here's one race in Hyrule that's like, oh, the gods will bestow upon you a new favor and will give you a completely new form. And then it's like, and then the Gorons are like, what about us? We're big. We don't swim. We don't have boats. Go fuck yourselves. Like, you just do whatever. Like,
well, the Gorons were mostly in like extinct. I feel by the Great Flood because there are very few in the Wind Waker.
Well, I mean, also I don't know. They live on top of mountains, and since the Hylians and everybody sort of like fled the lowlands and went to live on the mountains, maybe the divine doofuses that rule Hyrule were like, meh, they're fine already. They're already living where they already would be. We don't need to change them at all.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, they do appear later on in Spirit Tracks,
right.
So I guess they're all
well,
right.
Again, and, you know, the implication, it seemed like, from the Gorons was that they just lived somewhere else.
Right, yeah, and that makes sense.
But
I was going to get my other, I guess, more scientific, in a sense, reason for how the Zoras became the Ritos, is that, so if you look at the Zoras before the Great Flood in Hyrule, where did they live? They lived in rivers and lakes. That's fresh water. All of a sudden, the entire world becomes a sea that's salt water.
Yeah, but no, here's the thing. If anything, that's a tremendous desalinization point, because where does that water come from? Rain. And guess what isn't salt water? Rain.
True, okay.
So if anything, they would be fine because the oceans would be so significantly diluted, and everything else that relied on salt water would die. Which, considering... Actually, hold on. What's that one line from Ganondorf? The oceans, as far as the eye can see, no one can swim across them. There are no fish to catch. Maybe all the saltwater fish just died.
Or maybe, yeah...
Because, like, what's the only sea life you see? Are various offshoots of Octorok. You know, like, there's Octos, the Ogoroks and Big Octos, and then...
Yeah.
Sea hats, which seem like they evolved from pea hats, which could basically just be a weed that, or a weed-like creature that learned to be like aquatic, like a lily pad or something. And then you have Georgs. And there's no other, which is weird because on our world that's mostly ocean, the oceans are teeming with life. They hold the vast majority. Even something like the rainforest. When you look at the biodiversity in the ocean, the rainforest is like nothing. But in a Wind Waker, everything is, there's nothing there. It's all gone.
And in that case, I feel like it's probably the first theory that I presented, being like a lot of the magic the goddesses made it so that they don't want people to discover this thing that's beneath the surface, so they just took everything out of there, or something. I don't know. I mean, that's the explanation I can.
What's funny is all the times I've heard anyone talk about this, no one has ever mentioned desalinization.
Oh yeah.
Not to say I came up with it, but I'm just saying I've never heard it discussed around me.
Yeah, I haven't either, actually.
But it kind of makes sense considering how devoid of life the Great Sea is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, I mean...
when you're down there,
that's the kind of thing that'll kill everything within a generation. That doesn't give you a chance to evolve to cope with the new environment. That's basically like, over the course of some days, the entire world is flooded, and what used to be, salt water now makes up like 10% of the available water. So it's basically all fresh water with a side of salt now. And congratulations, you've all just died. Because, I mean, most saltwater animals, they can't take more than... some of them will die in hours. Some of them can take, like, days, weeks. And then, basically, I'm kind of wondering if, like, Georgs are one of the only things that survived. Because maybe they were a species that already existed. That is capable... For instance, you have something you could do with the bull shark, or in some cases it's called the Zambia shark, because it's found in the Zambia River. It's already capable of transitioning between the two. It can swim saltwater, it can swim freshwater. So maybe a species like that existed, and it's like, well, you're the lucky winner because you're the only one that can live in this anymore. Like, congratulations, everything else is dead.
We do also have those fishmen that give you maps.
Yes, the fishmen. They seem...
Whatever they are.
I don't know. Well, I mean, they're a sapient aquatic species. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was a couple Zora left who changed into those.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Because, like, maybe the gods or whatever... Like, if we're going with the whole, patron deity as evolutionary, factor, maybe a couple of them were like, well, we're going to need... eventually the hero's going to need somebody who knows what the hell's going on in the water, so... Congratulations, buddy.
But,
Hear it.
That's an interesting thing, though, about the hero in Wind Waker. The Link in the Wind Waker. What I... Like, he's my favorite Link, for the record. And the reason behind that is because he was never destined to be a hero. He wasn't, like... there was no prophecy about this guy saving the world. He was just a regular guy who wanted to save his sister, and he had to prove himself by going through a test of...
I feel like by the nature of the fact that they exist, they're all destined to be the hero. I think they only
Maybe. I guess you...
come into being when, like, again, it's that whole curse thing. It's the whole our three souls are forever locked in this nonsense kind of battle. So I feel like by nature of him existing, he's going to be the hero because he'll always be the hero. There's never and should never be an existence of him that isn't the hero because that's the purpose of his soul now. Which kind of supported by Hyrule Warriors, though it's non-canon. The whole point is that when Sia looked out over time, it's basically every time he crops up, he's the hero.
Right. I never actually beat Hyrule.
To see that part, you'd only need to play like the first couple levels.
I may have seen it, although it's been a very, very long time ago. I lost interest in that game like after like 2 or 3 levels.
That's okay.
But
I won't hold it against you.
Thank you. So yeah. I guess there's been a lot of magic talk.
And we said we weren't going to do that.
On that topic, the Koroks are easily magic.
Yes, those we know.
Magical.
The game outright states like, just turned them into this.
Yeah, precisely. That's definitely not evolution.
Basically said.
They used to be Koroks, but now they are... No, they used to be Kokiri, now they're Koroks, but it's not evolution.
Right, that's transformation, essentially. That's just, poof, you're this now.
And even the Kokiri's existence in the first place was magic. Like, they were all created by a tree. They weren't born or anything like that.
True, yeah. I mean, they're forever children. They don't really get to choice.
Yeah, they don't mate. They can't evolve.
That's very true.
Because they never become sexually mature.
I don't think they're capable of reproduction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't think so.
You can't sexually mature or not sexually mature if your species doesn't sexual. Like that's how that works.
Yeah, I guess they're immortal, or at least immortal in the sense that they won't ever die of old age.
Right.
I'm sure they can be killed.
So they're conditionally immortal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. At least that's how I always saw it.
Yeah,
and I mean, then I'm assuming it's the same thing for the Koroks.
Yeah, very true. Koroks don't seem to die. Or
the children of
really
the
be susceptible to any sort of pain. Because I'll tell you this.
Yeah, dude, they can live in the...
Oh, what?
No, I was just gonna say, like, you find in Breath of the Wild, you find Koroks in the, like, warmest parts of the Death Mountain.
Yeah, like where your wooden stuff bursts into flame.
armor.
They're just like, hey, you found me! And then they should be like, hey, you like, poor thing. His dying act was to give you a small poo. Like, it's terrible.
Yeah. Oh man.
I feel like we're moving far afield of our original subject matter, but
I don't mind too much.
Well, I'm not sure how much more we have to discuss on the evolution of species in Hyrule. If we're talking about
sure either. My list is. I've reached the bottom of my list. Do you have anything else you wanted to bring up?
I think at some point I had wanted to talk more about just like the basic morphological differences between the Blins, but we sort of went on too long about that one. I didn't really feel like going into they're just listing their differences, but it's not really important. Because it doesn't fit in anymore. I'm not going to have him edit it that way either.
Okay, that's fair.
But
that's fair.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else that's particularly compelling. But I almost wonder if, like, this might be a subject that maybe needs a round two someday.
I mean, I can imagine we could probably come up with more things to talk
Well,
about on this topic because we honestly we haven't talked about it a whole lot. We talked about the Blinn enemies, the reptile Foss enemies. We talked about Octoroks and Parellas
right.
and
And I think for the interest
and
of time,
Zoras.
it's probably best to keep it
Like,
short. But I feel like
I think
my
so.
hope
Yeah.
is that, other members of the community will listen to this and they'll be like, hey, I have my own idea. And maybe, and once ideas have had time to percolate, a couple other people can be like, well, this is my 2 cents. And, because it's kind of hard to have
Absolutely.
this discussion when it's me and you and 50% of Charles. And, he had to cut. I don't know what's edited out and what's not, but in case this wasn't clear, Charles had to cut and run early. We got a really late start recording, and he had to go to bed. So that's
Yeah.
I haven't been interrupting him for like a half hour or for like 40 minutes straight. He hasn't been here anymore. So
Right. Yeah, it's not just us rambling on. It's that he actually hasn't been here.
right.
But yeah, I think that's good. And exactly, if either of the listeners have anything they feel would be, something that could be discussed on a future topic or on a future segment that's related to this, I'm definitely up for having that discussion and having, I guess expanding on this topic even further. Because after all, we didn't really go into a lot. Like, there's still a lot of different enemies and races and species that we haven't talked about at all.
Not all of them have appearances outside of one or two games, so it kind of makes it a little bit hard.
True.
Like,
still though, I feel like there's probably things we missed, and if we did, I'd love to go back to this topic again because I had a lot of fun.
Although I will say one thing that largely hasn't, like, that actually has been in a lot of games, we haven't touched on it, but it almost does not change. Tektites.
Oh.
They're basically the same
Yeah.
in every game. They're a weird quadrupedal
really
insect thing.
Four-legged.
4 legs, one eye, hops around, and they don't really change. That they're pretty much the same thing in every game they appear in.
That's true.
Which is kind of makes me think of like sharks and other like very primitive insects or something, where it's basically like nature got it right 50 million years ago and hasn't needed to change it much. Like, all it does.
Yeah, it's like silverfish.
Yeah.
Like, we have silverfish. They've lived for like how many years? I don't know. But,
Or like I said, sharks and crocodiles. That they're very. I mean, obviously they've changed like little bits, but pretty much always have been suited to their environment to the way they are. Adding or subtracting Australia or something doesn't really get us there. But yeah, Tektites are like they get the trophy for not really changing from game to game. I didn't even think about them until just now too. It's just like, holy crap.
Yeah, that's it. It's a very good observation. Yeah, they're very much the same always. Interesting. But yeah, I guess with that said, we'll probably wrap this up right here.
I want to go order a pizza.
Oh, sounds good. And it is 4 a.m. here, so I'm probably going to...
It's 10 p.m. here, but I'm still going to order that damn pizza.
Yeah, you do that.
All right, and
So, thank you very much for listening to this Evolution of Zelda Creatures discussion.
Round 1.
Round 1, exactly. That's what we call it. And we'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye.